Right, I think we're live. Welcome everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to get data from a OPC UA server into our PI system. So the live stream today, I'm going to go through the theory on how the OPC UA, the PI connector for OPC UA works, really from first principles through architecture, and then we're going to actually configure it. So I'll configure it from scratch, assuming that we already have a PI system. If you have OPC UA servers in your organization, if you're looking to expand your PI system to new data sources and new devices, and you're a PI system administrator, this video's for you. So while I'm presenting live, if you are in the live session, feel free to ask questions as we go. There's going to be a little bit of downtime while we do some installations, but if you're looking at the recording, there should be bookmarks down the bottom. You can go back and forward through our installations and through the theory. So this course, well, this stream is a little bit of an extension onto the PI System Administrator courses on our learning website. You can see links to those courses down the bottom. This is really an extension to the Beyond the Basics course, but really you should be able to pick it up no matter what your experience is. If you are completely new to the PI system though, I recommend clicking on the link down below that links you to PI System Basics, at least. Then you'll get the terminology. I'm going to assume you've at least taken PI System Basics and have a little bit of administrative knowledge. Right. One more point is you can follow along with me. The environment that I'll use, you can boot that same environment if you have a subscription to our Training Cloud environments. Links for that are also down below. All right, and with that, let's get going. Okay. So a little bit about what we're going to do today. We're assuming that we have, well, in our simulation at least, should be fairly close to real life. We have over here a bunch of pumps, and they will have sensors on them. Draw that a little bigger. They have sensors on them, and they're feeding in to an OPC UA server. If you're completely new to OPC or OPC UA in general, really this means that these pumps, the temperatures, pressures, everything the pumps are doing, all the sensors on the pumps are being exposed using the OPC UA standard from an OPC UA server. As we go through the demo, we'll see what this actually looks like and how we can read data from it and get it through to users. So our ultimate goal here is to make this data available to our users down here. Well, that's right next to me. Here we go. We're gonna have a user right next to me. They want to know what all these pumps are doing. So how do we get that data down to us? We're going to use the PI connector for OPC UA Generation 2 to do that today. We have 3 virtual machines here. We have PI int 01, PI int 02, and PI SRV01. On our simulation system, and I'm assuming that if you're going to install one of these, you already have installed a rudimentary PI system. So you have a data archive installed, so PI data archive, and you have PI asset framework installed as well, so AF asset framework. PI data archive hosts all of the data coming from all of the sensors, and asset framework exposes the data as a in a hierarchical format, making it easier to read from users and also runs calculations on the data. So how do we get data from here through to here? Today, we're going to install a PI connector, OPC UA connector, PI OPC UA connector. We need to install a few other components as well. PI connectors don't write straight to the data archive and asset framework. They go through a PI connector relay. And when we manage these pieces of software, we use the PI Data Collection Manager. So we're going to install these 3 pieces of software, run the install kits on these machines. We are then, this is us. You know it's us because we're wearing a hat. There we go. We're pretty happy. We're going to connect to the data collection manager, and how we're going to do that is we're going to open up a browser. The data collection manager is this little user interface inside the browser, and it will manage these other components for us. So it will configure the connector and the connector relay to read from our OPC UA server right out to the relay, and then the relay will create tags on the data archive, and it will also automatically create a hierarchy on our asset framework server. It'll replicate the hierarchy that exists up in our OPC UA server. When we do this, we're going to explore what options we have and really get it installed from scratch, get it working, and I'll answer any questions as we go. So the steps we're going to take for all of this. Step number 1 is configure security. We've got some incoming connections here to our data archive and asset framework, and if you've taken any of our administrator courses before, you'll know step number 1, let whatever service you're trying to get into the server in. So configure security on both data archive and asset framework to let the connector relay in. The DCM actually needs to connect as well, so it has a little configuration connection to both, just so we can see what it's doing. So we'll configure that. Then we'll install the connector relay and the DCM, the data collection manager. We'll set up the relay and the data collection manager after that. Then we'll install the connector. And then we'll configure the connector. All right. Sound fun? I'm just going to go ahead and do that now. If anyone has any questions about how anything works or what I'm doing or why I'm doing it, please feel free to fire away in the chat. Now, I very lightly went through how everything works there. There's a few extra steps. There's some more security between the connector and the OPC UA server that we'll configure, but I'll explain that as I go. Let's get configuring. So before we start, I might show you around our system. If you are following along with me, you'll have access to really the same system. Now, the link that I put down there to get to the subscriptions, you'll need to pick the right environment to boot. The name of it is down there. If you're watching this video in the future, I mean far away in the future, your mileage may vary, the image may have changed. These images update with time, versions may increase. Yeah, your mileage may vary if you're looking at this recording in quite a while. But let's take a look. Here we've got several virtual environments. VMs, we've got Pi SRV01, that's in blue. We have Pi Int01 in gray. That's going to have our data source on it, our OPC UA server. It's already installed. We're going to read from it. And we've got Pi Int02, and that'll be our connector relay and our data collection manager. Okay, let's start configuring security. So we do that on Pi SRV01. For those that have taken the basic and beyond the basics administrator courses, this shouldn't be new to you on how we're actually going to do this. So I'm going to go through it fairly quickly. Now, the security configuration that we need is in this picture. So we'll need our connector relay and data collection manager, need slightly different access to our data archive and asset framework. I'm going to go through and configure it as I go. Now, when we actually run these, we're going to run them under some special service accounts called group managed service accounts. If you've done the administrator beyond the basics class, we use this type of accounts a lot. If you're not sure what group managed service accounts are, Google it. Microsoft has a lot of resources on it, and it's also covered in our beyond the basics administrator class. Now, Pi OPC UA Connector is going to run where we already have an account configured, and it's called SVC Pi Con exclamation mark because $, because it is a group managed service account. We have SVC Pi relay for the connector relay $, and we have SVC Pi DCM for our data collection manager. If you're following along with me in a virtual environment, all these accounts will be configured for you. If you're doing this for real in production, you'll need to pre-create these service accounts. They don't have to be group managed service accounts. They just have to be user accounts with passwords. We're going to use GMSAs in this session. Okay. So right now, these accounts don't have permission to do really anything. We're going to give them permission to connect to our data archive, according to the table that I showed a short time ago. So let's open up what we need to do that. So on our Pi SRV01, we're going to open up through Start, Pi System Explorer, and Pi System Management Tools, just because they both take a while to start up. So again, the chat is very quiet today. We have quite a few viewers. Say hi in the chat. Let me know that it's working. I hope it's working, and I hope no one's chatting and ignoring you. Okay. So let's go through the data archive configuration first. This is what we need. So I'll have this table off to the side. I guess if you want this table, take a screenshot now. Okay, that's about enough time. Then I'm going to move it off and then just do all the configuration. It's working. Thank you, Christine. Welcome. Not alone anymore. Feels so much better. Okay. Let's go through and configure it. All of this security is in the Database Security tab of System Management Tools. This controls the top-level objects of the server. We're giving these connector and connector relay, or connector relay and DCM, permission to make changes overall on the server. So, first off is PI DS. That controls who can make datasets, digital state sets, not datasets. Our connector relay will need to be able to do this when it reads that there are digital tags coming from our source. So we need to add in, well, I forgot a step. We actually let the services in first. So we're going to go to identities first. We're in identities. I'm going to make an identity for our data collection manager, or PI connector relay first. And double click on that and then make a mapping to it from PySchool, SVC, PI relay was my account that's been pre-configured. Okay. And next, we're making a mapping for our data collection manager. We're making an identity for it. And then we're going to make a mapping. I remember all my account names. I think that was it. Okay. All right. So I'm not going to go in depth into the security stuff because it's already been covered in many courses and is available on other videos. If you're really interested, you can look at the video playlists for our administrator courses or take them officially. Okay. In database security, we're going to give these identities permission to do different things. So PI DS is the first one. The connector relay needs read access, and the data collection manager needs, or connector relay needs read write, data collection manager needs read. So our connector relay needs read write, and data collection manager needs read. PI point is similar. The connector relay needs read write. It needs to be able to create points. For those only familiar with interfaces, connectors are kind of the next generation, and they'll automatically create points rather than rely on you to manage points yourself. So they need to be able to create points. So they need write access to PI point. PI user, they both need read. They both need to see and collate the PI users for security settings. Okay. Next, the PI data collection manager needs some other permissions. So it needs read for PI replication. Okay. And it needs read on PI DBSec. Okay. We're happy with that. Right. Next up is the asset framework side. So I'm in PI System Explorer here. This pumps database, we're going to use that to synchronize our hierarchy from our OPC UA server. We need to let our services in. So I clicked on database in the top left-hand corner. We need to let these new services in to the server. So the first thing we need to do is click on edit security. This edits the security at the whole server level. So we're editing the security server wide. And again, I forgot to make the mappings and trusts. make the mappings and identities. So first off, we're clicking on Show Properties to our server. This is where we make the identities and mappings. Similarly to what we did with the PI Data Archive side. I'm going to make 2 identities here. So one for PI Connector Relay, and then map it to my account. Okay. Now I'm just right clicking on white space here to get this menu up. Another one for PI Data Collection Manager. Okay. So we have our identities. Here they are. And we have made mappings to our accounts. Next thing we need to do is actually configure security. So we go OK here, and we go back into the button I trigger happily clicked before. So we're going to edit security for the server to let these in. The first thing we're going to do is let them into the server itself. So just a little show on what we need on the asset framework side. AF server level, which is what we're doing now, is read. This allows the accounts to get into the server itself, just connect and do nothing else. And then in the database and all items in the database that we want it to write to, we need read data, write data for the relay and just read access for the PI DCM. Okay. So to just let a account connect and do nothing else, you do this. We're just going to select the top level server object here, and then we're going to add our 2 identities. Remove everything and just give them read. Same with connector relay. So this doesn't just go for connectors, really for everything. If you just want to let something connect and do nothing else and then configure more permissions later, this is how you do it. The last thing is do not modify child permissions. We need to make sure that is selected, so only the server object top level is modified. And we go OK. So now those 2 accounts should be able to connect. Next, we're going to configure security for the pumps database. Now, if you don't have a database already set up, you can click on New Database. In our simulation here, we already have one set up for us. In fact, there'll always be one database in here. The first time you connect to AF, it'll tell you to make one. We're going to right-click and go Security on the pumps database and do the same thing. So add our identities, and then give them slightly different permissions. So PI Connector Relay needs read-write and read-write data, and PI DCM needs read and read data. And that's that. We're going to update child permissions. This means that not only the whole database, the top level database object is, we're modifying the security for that, but everything underneath. So these accounts will be able to, well, read for the DCM and read and write the connector relay to everything. Question from the audience. Hi, this is live. Can we watch it later? Yes, you just go back to the same link. And then, yeah, you'll see me where I am right now if you close it. You won't be able to ask questions then, though. That's much less fun. Okay. And that's that. That's our security configuration. We'll minimize these and see where we're at. Okay, so we've configured security. Our next step is going to be install the connector relay and the DCM. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to do that on PI int 02. These are already pre-downloaded on the simulation. If you're doing this for real, you'll need to download them from our customer portal. But first, I'm going to install the connector relay. And right-click and run as administrator. So here's where we get a little bit of downtime. If you have any questions, feel free to fire away. But most of this is next. We need to change a couple of things as we go through some of the installs. Okay. I'm just doing testing now, so no, I don't want to participate in the program. It's asking me for an asset server. This is the asset framework server that it's asking for. That is installed on the same machine as our data archive in this case. Really, they'll be separate if you've got any kind of larger installation. The defaults are fine here. And we can install. So while we're going through these installs, I'll talk a little more about the OPC UA Connector and why you would use it and what options you have as the downtime happens. But there's a couple of things we need to do here before I do. It asks us a port number. So the actual connector, the connector relay, and the DCM are all accessible over web pages. They all have a little rudimentary user interface, except for the DCM, which has a proper user interface. But it's asking us what port that interface should be installed on, and also what port should communication happen to, well, in this case, the connector relay. So when our connector starts writing to the relay, what port should it write on? Now, the default is 5460. If you select a different port, you'll need to make sure there's a hole poked in the firewall between them. We can check availability. This checks if anything else is using that port, and if it's not, it'll let us proceed. So we're accepting the default here. It asks us what account we would like to run this under. Now there's one little quirk with the installer here is it doesn't allow us to type in a group managed service account. It refuses to validate it. But we can kind of take advantage of the system a little bit, which is we can type in our own user credentials. I'm just getting my password. Okay. I can type in my own user credentials. So high school student 01 is who I'm logged in as right now. And then put my password here. Ask it to validate my account. See, the next button is grayed out. It won't let me proceed until it's validated an account. It says I have admin privileges, and that's too much privilege. That's okay, because what we're going to do is sneakily change this before we proceed in the installer. Yeah. See what I did? See what I did there? All right. So we can actually proceed next with our group managed service account now. There's a cheat code for you. It asks us where we want the buffer. If you're familiar with interfaces, buffering is set up independently of the interface, sort of independently. Buffering is just an inherent feature of the relay and the connector, and they'll just do it automatically. It's asking us where we want any files to go. If it can't connect to the data archive, where does it store data while it's waiting? I'm going to put it on my D drive in PyBuffer. And install. So I mentioned interfaces a few times. I'm going to assume that really everyone watching this has interfaces in their organization somewhere. Probably not many of you have connectors, which is the newer generation. They're getting more and more commonplace, which is why we're starting to release training content. This content that I'm presenting here will most likely make it into an online course soon, or a little later this year. And there's actually a third option as well, which are called adapters, which if you've been watching our live streams, the past quite a few live streams have been on adapters. So there's interfaces, connectors, and adapters. Each has their strengths and weaknesses. Interfaces being a lot more mature. There's a lot more data sources they can connect to. We have interfaces for something like 450 different sources. Connectors are fairly, well, a lot newer than interfaces are. They are a lot less manual when you configure them. You'll see when we configure our connector, it's a little fiddly to get the security correct, but once you've configured it, it's set and forget. So unlike interfaces, they have a lot less maintenance. Adapters are more aimed at the IoT kind of realm. They don't have a user interface to configure them. And they, well, if you've seen our live streams, the past few at least, they're configured over a command line or a RESTful interface. Now, as time goes on, you'll probably migrate to a combination of adapters and connectors, but we're talking years and years in the future here. Right now we see a mix, really a mix of all three. I guess less adapters because they're fairly new, is in the last year or two. All right, it's installing, creating certificates, which apparently takes a few minutes. Any questions about anything I said there or anything I've been going over? Stick them in the chat. While this is installing, I might get a head start and start installing the connector on PyInt01. So here's PyInt01. I'm opening install kits and I'm going to install the Pi connector for OPC UA. And just flick back and do what I need to do on both installers at once. The connector, we're going to accept the default port and do very similar configuration that we did on the connector relay. We're going to use my kludge again. It won't let us click next until we validate an account. After we've typed in just any account on the domain, it'll let us use a GMSA. I hope it's PyCon with one N. I'm just going to check that. It is. Okay, back over to PyInt02. Installation's finished. It's just asking us who we want to be an administrator of the connector relay. We'd like to add ourselves to the group. So we are now an administrator. And there's another group that we need to add ourselves to. So I'm going to click on Add More Users. And just for later, inside groups, Pi Trusted Installers. So members of this group can install and register Pi connectors with the data collection manager. We will need that in the future. So I'm going to add student 01 to this group too. Okay. We're going next, and we're finishing. And next, I'm doing the same with Pi Data Collection Manager. It's asking us for a port number. If we check availability of 5460, it's going to complain at us. Port's already in use. That's because we used it for the relay. We need to choose another one. We're going to choose 5461. And do the same little trick we've been doing this whole time. And switch it to our GMSA. And I hope I've got all the names right. We'll see if I've got them wrong. All right, while that's working, I'm going to go to PyInt01 and finish off the installation here. It's asking us where the buffer needs to be. Hi, Jason. And while I'm going through this, feel free to fire away any questions you have. Going through installations isn't rocket science. Okay, I'm going to click on PyBuffer. And that should be most of the... There we go. Okay. So while those finish installing, back to our little diagram. A little more on architecture. So a nice thing about connectors is the flexibility in architecture. We've got 3 machines here. We could easily have 4 and have Pi Connector Relay installed on a different one. I mean, DCM probably installed on a different one. Really, this allows you to split up your machines on different networks. So maybe you have the process control network up here with your control system and the connector itself. Down here, you might have a DMZ, a demilitarized zone, between the PCN and the corporate network, which would be over here. Where all your users are and your PyData archive and asset framework are. Having the relay in between lets you only flow data in one direction, and gives you flexibility on where you want to install the DCM and the management software. So generally you'll have maybe even just one DCM for all your connectors, depending on how your networks work out, but it's really up to you on how many of these you install and where. The actual communications between, we chose the port numbers where connections are going to communicate. So this was 5460. DCM to there was 5460. And DCM to there was also 5460. And the actual DCM incoming was 5461. So you have flexibility on what ports you want to open and where you want to install all of these different things. That is another nice aspect of connectors over interfaces, which sort of forces you into one kind of architecture. Well, a very small amount of architectures. Looks like the installs are finishing up. So where are we now? We have installed our connector relay and DCM, and we've also skipped a step and installed our connector as well, just because we could do both at the same time. Next is setup. So we're going to set up the connector relay and the DCM first, after we add our users to appropriate groups. We're adding user here, and we've already added our user to everything we need to add it to on Pi int 02. So we're going to go next and finish. And Pi int 01, we're going to do the same thing, and also add our user to that other Pi trusted installers group. Okay. Okay. The boring stuff's out of the way. We've got everything installed. Now we're actually going to configure it. So this next part is really why you go for connectors to move your data from your sensors to your users or to your Pi system. We're going to start configuring by connecting to the DCM, the data collection manager. So you'd have to type in HTTPS // machine name and port number. We actually have a pre-configured shortcut here, so I don't need to type. So we're connecting to Pi int 02 5461, which is our Pi DCM, the port we chose for it, /UI. We need to connect using an account. This is us, so we need to type in our username and password because we added ourselves to those management groups. And I'll sign in. I'm not going to get it to remember my username and password. I also suggest you don't when you're doing this for real, because there are some places in the user interface where you need to type in the username and password for the OPC server, which is going to be different to your Windows credentials, and it's going to automatically insert your Windows credentials everywhere, which is not what you want a lot of the time. Okay, so this is the data collection manager. Ultimately, we're going to have some boxes here showing our data flow. So we're going to slowly add all of our different components to our data collection manager. It doesn't know about anything right now. It doesn't know about our relay, our connector, or even our data archive and asset framework. So the first thing we're going to set up is the relay. We're going to click on plus here, add a relay. And just checking my notes. So you can choose your own naming conventions for these, but I like to name them the machine name the relay is installed on, and then its role, I guess. The address is the host name of the relay, so PI02. The port is the port we chose when we installed it. And the credentials are our credentials. So the person requesting the action. Yeah, these credentials will only be used when the initial setup is done. When we say save settings here, the DCM and the relay exchange certificates and become authenticated with each other. So we're going to save settings. And there we go. And no, I do not want to save password. Thank you, Chrome. Okay. It's been added. It's got a little exclamation mark. It says it doesn't have any connectors, but it's otherwise healthy. Next thing we're doing is adding a destination. So this is a PI Data Archive and Asset Framework server. So destination is, I like to name these as the machine name of the destination. And their role, it is a PI server. So the PI Data Archive address, they're both on the same machine. There we go. If they're on different machines, then I would type in different machine names here. And they both count as one destination, even though it's pushing tag data to the PI Data Archive and Asset Framework hierarchy structure to the Asset Framework server. Okay. Now, assuming we've got all of our security correct, that should work. All right. So we're pretty happy with that. We're going to click on our destination and configure our data. So here's where we choose where we want the hierarchy, or where we want to publish to in an Asset Framework structure. We're going to select the defaults here. You can't see it because I am right there. Maybe I'll move myself over here. Well, we're just going to select the defaults here, but when you're doing this for real, you'll probably want to select a part of a Asset Framework hierarchy that you already have. So we're just going to select defaults, but here is where you would say change settings, so edit destination data settings, and you would change where your connector is going to write to inside Asset Framework and which database. Okay. I'm canceling that for now. Okay. The last thing to do is connect them. So there's this little checkbox right here. I'm going to use that to connect. And save configuration. Save and start. Okay. Looks like I didn't mess up my security config. Well, we don't know that for sure until a bit later, maybe. And we still have no connectors, but that's okay for now. Okay, we're ready to put our connector in here as well. Now, let's go over to our PI Int01 and check out our OPC UA configuration. Well, we'll check where we are first. We have set up our connector relay and our data collection manager. We're up to configuring our OPC UA connector, specifically getting it connected here to our OPC UA server. I'm going to also go over some now, very briefly in a low amount of detail on what OPC UA, how it keeps track of objects, a little bit of terminology there, and how to find things from a layman's perspective. Right. Well, let's go check it out. The first thing I'm going to do is open up a OPC UA client and take a look at my OPC UA server. So I'm opening up UA Expert here. And I'm going to connect to the OPC UA server on my machine. So this OPC UA Expert, this is not made by Aviva or OSI. It's just a way to read from the OPC UA server. I'm going to add a new server. I'm going to, I know where my server is. So I'm going to add the address and go OK. If you are following along, I'm just going to add that address into chat. And then you'll be able to see that. Okay. We're going to go OK here. We're going to, select none here. Expand it out. We're going to select no security. When we connect with the OPC UA connector, we're going to select which type of security we'd like to use. We're ultimately going to select one of the sign and encrypt securities and go through how to configure that. But for now, when we're just looking at it, we're going to select none. A lot of OPC UA servers will not let you do this, but this simulator does. So we're going to select no security for now and just right-click and connect. Trust the certificate and click continue down the bottom. Okay. So our OPC UA server has a hierarchy of objects inside it. It's got, a few different hierarchies, data type examples, simulation examples. These are all different hierarchies of objects and sensors that it has on it. And channel 1 is another hierarchy. Server is a special hierarchy for the server level. We'll actually take a look at that in a little bit. But we're going to take a look at simulation examples and then site pumps. These are the pumps we want to grab data from. When we're configuring our connector, we're going to filter this down and say only grab the data from our pumps and recreate the hierarchy back in our asset framework server. Okay, so it looks like we've got a few different sensors here. Okay, we're going to leave this open. I'm going to come back to it and show you the terminology that we use when we're finding data inside OPC UA and filtering it on the connector side. Okay. So this is, we're going to start configuring our connector now. The first thing we're going to do is register our connector on the PI DCM. When we registered the relay, we actually did it from the DCM itself. When we're registering the OPC UA connector, we as the administrator are going to connect our browser to the OPC UA connector and then register it on the DCM. So we're going to tell it to register itself on the DCM. This is more reliable. Well, its data is going in that direction, so it's more reliable. And this is the way the documentation tells you to do it. It can be possible to do it the other way. We're going to follow the best practices here. So we're going to open up Google Chrome on the OPC UA server itself. I mean, you don't need Google Chrome installed on an OPC UA server, but we have it. You could use any browser from somewhere within the network. We're opening up, Well, we're navigating to PI 01 5460 UI. That is the port that we chose to install the connector on. And I've lost the password in my clipboard. Okay. So we're going to set up this connector. And type in some details here. So first we need to type in the address of our DCM. It's on 5461. And our username and password are us, the person that is making the registration request. Now, this PI 01 and the DCM doesn't need to be in the same domain. It kind of works better if the DCM is in a domain of some kind, but doesn't need to be. All of this configuration, all of the different services trade certificates and configure their own security and connectivity, but you need to type in your account to provide that right at the start. So this is the account on the PI DCM side. Hi, how's it going? Hi in chat. Anyone in chat? Any questions? Feel free to ask them at any point. Description, it will be PI 02 OPC UA. It's a good enough name. And we're going to request registration. Okay. And that's all we need to do on the connector side. Once we've requested the registration, we can go into the DCM on PI 02, and now we see this untitled connector in here that we can configure. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We're clicking Untitled Connector. We're going to give it a more useful name. There we go. PI 2 OPC UA. And approve this registration and continue. All right. Next, we're going to connect them up and save configuration. Save and start all components. And looks like we're happy. So we now almost have our full data flow, but we don't have a data source set up. So we've got the connector here all set up to in our architecture here, but we haven't set up the source on it yet. We just connected with the client. We're going to do a similar thing here and give it basically the same information we gave it with the client. So let's go and do that. We're going to go into Data in PI 02 OPC UA and add a data source. So we're adding our server here. The server name is, I'm going to call it the name of my OPC server, which is, it's a CAP server EX simulator that we're going to use to test this connection, well, for this test environment. And it is on PI int, but I like to put the machine name first. PI int 02 CAP server EX. So, yeah, and it is our OPC server for our test environment. Next, we're choosing a mapping type. This really puts the connector in different modes. So do we want it to create the tags that it finds on the source, or using a subset of the tags that we are going to configure? And do we want it to create asset framework as well, just as it sees on the source? Do we want it to only create the tags and just have a very quick configuration here? There's a couple of extra options with tags only. Or do we want to use the PCS7 or the ISA95 standards when we create our asset framework structure? Now, if you're interested in tags only, PCS7 or ISA95, go check out the documentation. We're not going to use them here. They just, when copying over the data, we'll arrange it slightly differently using those standards. We're going to use generic here. Our discovery or server endpoint URL is the connection URL for our OPC UA server. Now, I didn't say how I came up with this before. This is the same one that I typed into chat up there. But it's really, it'll be told to me by whoever manages the OPC server, the OPC UA server in my organization. They will know this and they will tell me how to connect to it. Now, username and password here, leave blank. This is not, whenever we're making connections here with the DCM, this username and password it's asking for us for is the username and password for whatever you are setting up. So whatever you're trying to connect to. This is the username and password for the OPC UA server, not for your domain credentials or anything like that. Our OPC UA server doesn't use usernames and passwords. Many of them don't. They'll use certificate transfer instead, which we're going to go over. So we'll discover available endpoints. Here we are asked select the endpoint. So we're choosing the security type. Here we're going to follow best practices and use the most strong security. The configuration is the same no matter which one we select really in our circumstance. We're going to select this one here, sign and encrypt, basic 128, RSA 15. We can go 256, go the whole hog. Okay. Some other little details here is transformational rules. This is a really useful part of the configuration because we can tell it to our naming pattern for our tags. It's not too flexible in what we can do with our naming pattern, but we can change it a little bit. So right now, when it creates tags, if we let it just create the tags that it wants to, it's going to go and name them in the format data source, which is whatever we named our data source, which is PI02 kept server EX. And then the namespace, if I go over to PI01 and I select one of these tags, bearing temp, I see this namespace index. This namespace is how OPC UA separates out groups of variables, or hierarchies, for lack of a better word. So that's what's going to be in the tag naming convention. And then after that, it'll be identifier. So it's going to use the identifier here, which is simulation examples dot side pumps dot pump one dot bearing temp, which is the full path to our bearing temp. I'm going to change this so it's just identifier. Or really, I should include my source as well, I mean, people may not want to see that. Really, the identifiers they're used to looking at on the OPC UA side, if you want them to replicate exactly to PI tags, this is what you do. We're going to keep it like this. And other than that, we're going to leave this as default. Okay, save. Okay, now, next step is to discover data source contents. We have our server set up. All we've really done is typed in the details for our server. We haven't actually tried to connect yet and see if the data we want is there. So we're going to discover data source contents. This will crawl through the OPC UA server, through the whole hierarchy, and then tell us what tags can be synced over to our data archive. So let's see. Contents not discovered. We're just going to discover data source contents. We get an error. How unexpected. So, error encountered. Please check the message log. Okay, let's check the message log. So if you ever get any errors here, we can go into diagnostics and then message log after we have our connector selected. And then we see errors that it's encountered. By default, it'll only record warning and error messages. You can change this with these different settings. But the error we need is here. So data discovery task not completed, unable to connect, can't connect, and then here is a bit more information. So connection failed. Please verify the connector trusts the certificate provided by the server. So it's saying that I tried to connect to the server, but I don't trust it. Now, what does that actually mean? So a little bit on how OPC UA security works. We really have two objects here. That's my big head's in the way. That's better. We have two objects here. We have our OPC UA server and our PI OPC UA connector. And this is going to get a bit mushy unless I separate them out. There you go. It can be in the middle. Now, these have the concept of certificates. All of the security here, most of the time with OPC UA, you're going to experience is with certificates and certificate transfer. They have different storage locations for these. The explanation I'm giving here is going to be slightly simplified, but generally all you need to know to get it working. Here we go. There's my terribly wonky boxes. Now we have self, we have denied, we have trusted. Different OPC servers call these different things. I can't remember what the connector calls it. I think it's untrusted. No, it's probably denied. All right. Now, the OPC UA server has its own public certificate. So, OPC server. This is a certificate. that it knows about. On our OPC connector side, that also has a certificate. These certificates are, well, they're same as any other certificate, or similar to any other certificate, that you can think of them as files in a file system. OPC connector. These are our certificates. When the initial connection was made, our connector attempted to connect over here, and certificates were exchanged. So the server gave its public certificate to the connector, and the connector gave its public certificate to the server. Now, each one looked at the certificate and said, do I trust this certificate? Is this in my trusted certificate store? No. This is the first certificate that it's seen. It has nothing in its certificate store. So both of these got denied. The connection was denied in both directions. What happens when a connection is denied is the denied certificate gets put into a little storage location here. And then our connection would have been denied on both sides, and both of them would have had errors saying, you cannot connect because I don't trust you. Okay, so this is where we come in. This is us. You know it's us because we've got a hat on. We are going to open up a file browser and move this physical file down to another folder location. So the OPC UA connector, the way you trust certificates is you move them from one directory to another. OPC UA servers, it depends on the vendor. So different vendors have different procedures on doing this. Look at the documentation of your OPC server on how you would do this, how you would trust a certificate. But this specific one, the Kepware server we're using to test with, is we actually use a user interface. So Kepware's user interface, and there'll be two little zones. Oh, actually, not a little zone. There'll just be the certificate there, and you're going to right-click and trust on the certificate, and then it'll be trusted. So it essentially moves it for you down. So let's do that. First, the connector. We're going to go to PI 01 because this is where that connection actually happens. We're going to open up Windows File Explorer, go into where our connector is installed. So we installed it. It was in PI System D drive, program files, connectors, OPC UA. Inside the PKI client folder, we have these folders rejected and trusted. Oh, and it wasn't denied, it was rejected, is what it uses there. So rejected, certs, and we see this cap server ex UA server certificate in here. We're going to cut this and then go into the trusted folder and paste it in here. So we've essentially told our connector, yep, you denied the server before, but you should trust it. Let's have another go at doing a discovery. I'm going to go back into data and discover data source contents again. Okay, we get an error again. We haven't trusted it from the server. And the message log we get a unable to connect error. We don't actually get a certificate error here. We just say, it just says unable to connect. If we wanted more information, we'd have to look at the log on the OPC server side. Let's go back to Pioneer 01. And then this next step would be different depending on your OPC UA server vendor. But for this specific Kepware simulator, we go into OPC UA configuration and trusted clients. We see we have here, there was an attempt from a application called OPC UA Connector host, and it was denied. It's got this little deny cross. We're going to right click and trust. Okay. So we have now moved over our certificates. And the next time they connect, they should trust each other. Let's go check it out. So I'm on Pioneer 02 again. Inside data. I'm going to discover data source contents again. Okay, that was, well, there are question marks, but that was successful. There's no red exclamation marks. It's not angry at us. Let's take a look at the rest of the configuration. These question marks just say, yeah, awaiting data selection. We haven't finished configuring the data selection yet. Okay, so discover data source contents. Again, what that does when we do that is it crawls through the OPC UA server address space and then collates everything. And then we pick what we want from there. We're going to click select data and select what we want. So there's a few ways we can do this. I'm going to show you both ways. We can use a query, or we can pick manually, which sort of is still a query, but it does it automatically for us. Let's take a look at what we find. So if we expand this out, we can see we've got a bunch of different individual tags and objects here inside simulation samples and side pumps. There we go. So really we want everything under side pumps. We could select this checkbox here, which would select everything under side pumps. But I'll show you how to make a query as well, which is a little more useful. So we're going to go new selection query. And we're going to select properties. Properties are the tags underneath here. I just realized I'm blocking my pumps on the left-hand side. From, well, where our parent name starts with pump. This should grab every property, so every tag underneath something that starts with pump. So it should grab everything underneath all these pumps here. So run selection query. Okay. So it's grabbed these different properties underneath our pumps now. And it's come up here. We're going to pick some more individual properties. I'd like to, and I always like to import some server-specific properties in, so more like health tag data. I'd like to grab the data rate and the data source state. These two tags are quite useful to get. These are actually generated by the connector, connector itself, not the server. So these are health data about the server that it's connected to. What's the rate? How many events per second are we getting in? And what state is my data source in? Or the OPC server? Is it running? Is it not? Is it an error? The current time, that is the time that the server, OPC server, believes it to be. We'll import that just for fun. The server state, so what state is the server reporting itself to be? And the last time the server was started. These are quite useful to have. These are top-level properties for either the server itself or the connector that come up here. So we've grabbed all of these. And we're going to go next. Okay. Now we're choosing tag names. I'm going to click on Check Tag Names. So it'll tell us what tag names everything is going to have. There are some things that I'm going to change here. So the convention follows what we said right at the start, which is we removed the namespace and the server name, so it is just the hierarchy down to our tags, which is what we want. Our health tags that we grabbed are all nicely named except for these three. Might want to change those. We can rename individual tags over the right-hand side. Well, we should be able to. I don't want a full custom. I would like to create new for these ones. No, I may need to do custom for those ones. I may not bother. But if you want to customize tag names in bulk, you can click custom, export a spreadsheet. So we can export, which downloads a spreadsheet for us. Under CSV, we can edit the CSV. Either in Excel or Notepad or whatever we want, and change things and then re-import it if we really want to. So I might do that with these 2259, 58, and 57. These are some of the health tags. Because of the way that I said scrape the tags and name them, it hasn't picked up exactly what they are, just their IDs. So we could go into PI-1 and check what these are. So 2259, 2258, and 2257. These are up on the server level object. Well, they should be. There we go, server status. So we have current time. That one is 2258. 2258 was current time. Start time is 2257. And 2259 is state. Yep. Great. So we can save that and import it back in. And I've realized I probably changed the wrong column there. Which was a little dumb. Okay, automatic name, custom name. Great. I might just do one of them. 2259 was the state. And we can just import that back in. I should have opened it up in Excel, shouldn't I? All right, we can save that, import it back in. And we see that, yeah, we have a custom name for one of the tags now. Okay, I'm happy with this. I'm going to go next. And it shows us exactly what it's grabbing. So we're pretty happy with this. Other than that, what do we want to do with future changes? Default is notify me. So in the PI DCM, you'll get a notification saying there's new tags added to the OPC UA server. What do you want to do? Or we can just say, yeah, just automatically add new tags in, which I want to do actually, because we're using the default names for everything, so it doesn't really matter. If tags are deleted from the source, so from the OPC UA server, they will not be deleted on the PI data archive. They will stay there. If a tag is renamed on the OPC UA server, then it will be detected as a completely new tag. So you'll get all the old data in the old name and then all the new data in the new name as two separate tags on the data archive. Yeah, because there's no way for us to tell that they have been renamed rather than one has been deleted and the other one has been created on the source. Okay. I'm going to save this. All right, and everything's happy. So let's go over to our PI SIV01 back in our AF database, and let's refresh. So hey, look, we have a hierarchy getting started. Our site pumps, our pumps are here. They have attributes, great. Nice. On our data archive site, we can go to current values and search for these tags. So I can say I'll need to, they'll start with simulation samples. I think. PI02 OPC UA simulation samples. Okay, it was data source and then the PI02. Okay. All our data's flowing. We're all good. Right. So we can check the last bit off. We've configured our connector now. And configuring the connector essentially configures the tags as well. So you'll notice through none of that, we got our Excel or the PyPoint section of Pi System Management Tools to create tags. We do not need to create, you don't need to create your own tags or connectors. You might think that this security stuff was a little fiddly to set up, but compared with setting up DCOM security, if you've done that before, this is a cakewalk. This is much less complex. So really the advantages this has over interfaces are much lower maintenance. And by maintenance, I mean tag creation. Most of the work you do with interfaces is creating tags, making sure they work. The connector just does that. And initial configuration and security is much easier and more secure with a connector. So I've said quite a few times, you've got a real decision on if you're going to use an interface or a connector to read from a source. We haven't actually got an interface for an OPC UA server. If you're going to read from this, you would need some kind of OPC DA wrapper, which a lot of vendors do provide. And then you would install an interface to connect to that OPC DA wrapper. And then go from there. The disadvantage of OPC UA server. So a few disadvantages. One is failover and redundancy. It does not support failover and redundancy. It does support history recovery. So if any of the tags on the OPC server side are historized, it will recover history, but not on demand. It'll only do it if connection goes out. When it comes back, it'll recover the history. So that's really the downside to a connector over an interface. Interfaces do support redundancy, and if you use OPC HDA, you can recover history on demand. However, really connectors are the set and forget option here. And that's really all I wanted to cover. We're right on an hour and a half, which is about what I planned. Actually, I had no idea, but an hour and a half sounds good. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. I'll hang around for another 30 seconds, minute, and answer any questions anyone has. I forgot to finish my coffee. It'll be very cold. Delicious. Thanks, Rick. So I guess that's about the delay that YouTube has between me saying something and the chat to come in. But seeing as though no one has any questions, I'll shut up shop. And I'd like to thank everyone for listening. If you are looking at the recording and you have questions, please comment down below. We'll see that. We'll respond. For documentation on the OPC UA connector that I used, see down below in the description. But other than that, thanks everyone. And good luck with connector configuration in your future. See you later.